"You promised," I reminded Mr. Patten, "to play cards on the table." "My dear young lady," he replied, "I have no cards. I suspect a game, that's all." "Then, do you need me?" The detective bent forward, his arms on his desk, and looked me over carefully. "What sort of shape are you in? Tired?" "No." "Nervous?" "Not enough to hurt." "I want you to take another case, following a nurse who has gone to pieces," he said, selecting his words carefully. "I don't want to tell you a lot. I want you to go in with a fresh mind. It promises to be an extraordinary case." "How long was the other nurse there?" 4 days. "She went to pieces in 4 days?" "Well, she's pretty much unstrung. The worst is, she hasn't any real reason. A family chooses to live in an unusual manner because they like it, or perhaps they're afraid of something. The girl was, that's sure. I had never seen her until this morning. A big, healthy-looking young woman. But she came in looking back over her shoulder as if she expected a knife in her back. She said she was a nurse from St. Luke's, and that she'd been on the case for 4 days. She left that morning after about 3 hours sleep in that entire period, being locked in a room most of the time, and having little but crackers and milk for food. She thought it was a case for the police. Ill in the house. Who was her patient?" "There is no illness, I believe. The French governess had gone, and they wished the children competently cared for until they replaced her. That was the reason given her when she went. Afterwards she was puzzled. How are you going to get me there?" He gathered acquiescence from my question and smiled approval. "Good girl," he said. "Never mind how I'll get you there. You are the most dependable woman I know." "The most curious, perhaps," I retorted. 4 days on the case, 3 hours of sleep, locked in yelling police! "Is it out of town?" "No. In the heart of the city, on Beauregard Square. Can you get some St. Luke's uniforms? They want another St. Luke's nurse." I said I could get the uniforms, and he wrote the address on a card. "Better arrive early in the evening," he said. "But if they are not expecting me?" "They will be expecting you," he replied enigmatically. "The doctor. If he's a St. Luke's man, there is no doctor." It was 6 months since I had solved, or helped solve, the mystery of the buckled bag for Mr. Patten. I had had other cases for him in the interval, cases in which the police could not get close enough. As I said when I began this record of my crusade against crime and the criminal, a trained nurse gets under the very skin of the soul. She finds motives that have fired the funds of life revealed in their pitifulness. Gradually, I had come to see that Mr. Patten's point of view was right, that if the criminal uses every means against society, why is society not against the criminal? At first I had used this as a flag of truce to my nurse's ethical training. Now I flaunted it, a mental and moral banner. The criminal against society, and I against the criminal. And, more than that, against misery, healing pain by augmenting it sometimes, but working like a surgeon. For good. I had 6 cases in 6 months. Only in one had I failed to land my criminal, and that without any suspicion of my white uniform and rubber-soled shoes. Although I played a double game, no patient of mine had suffered. I was a nurse first, and a police agent second. If it was a question between turpentine compresses, stoops, professionally, and seeing what letters came in or went out of the house, the compress went first, and cracking hot, too. I am not boasting. That is my method, the only way I can work. And it speaks well for it that, as I say, only one man escaped arrest. An arson case in which the factory owner hanged himself in the bathroom needle shower in the house he had bought with the insurance money, while I was fixing his breakfast tray. And even he might have been saved for justice had the cook not burned the toast and been obliged to make it fresh. I was no longer staying at a nurse's home. I had taken a bachelor's suite of 3 rooms and a bath, comfortably downtown. I cooked my own breakfasts when I was off duty, and I dined at a restaurant nearby. Luncheon I did not bother much about. Now and then, Mr. Patten telephoned me, and we lunched together in remote places where we would not be known. He would tell me of his cases, and sometimes he asked my advice. I bought my uniforms that day and took them home in a taxicab. The dresses were blue, and over them for the street of St. Luke's, girls wore long cloaks. English fashion of navy blue serge and a blue bonnet with a white ruching and white lawn ties. I felt curious in it, but it was becoming and convenient. Certainly, I looked professional. At 3 o'clock that afternoon, a messenger brought a small box, registered. It contained a St. Luke's badge of gold and blue enamel. At 4 o'clock, my telephone rang. I was packing my suitcase according to the list I keep pasted in the lid. Under the list, which was of uniforms, aprons, thermometer, instruments, a nurse's simple set of probe, forceps, and bandage scissors, was the word box. This always went in first. A wooden box with a lock, the key of which was round my neck. It contained skeleton keys, a small black revolver of which I was in deadly fear, a pair of handcuffs, a pocket flashlight, and my badge from the chief of police. I was examining the revolver nervously when the telephone rang, and I came within an ace of sending a bullet into the flat below. Did you ever notice how much you get out of a telephone voice? We can dissemble with our faces, but under stress, the vocal cords seem to draw up tight, and the voice comes thin and colorless. There's a little woman in the flat beneath, the one I nearly bombarded, who sings like a bird at her piano half the day, scaling vocal heights that make me dizzy. Now and then she has a visitor, a nice young man, and she disgraces herself, flat Fs, fogs Es even, finally takes cowardly refuge in a wretched mezzo-soprano, and doubtless cries herself to sleep later on. The man who called me had a thin-drawn voice of extreme strain. A young voice. "Miss Adams," he said, "this is Francis Reed speaking. I have called St. Luke's, and they referred me to you. Are you free to take a case this afternoon?" I fenced. I was trying to read the voice. This afternoon? Well, before night, anyhow. As early this evening as possible. The voice was strained and tired. Desperately tired. It was not peevish. It was even rather pleasant. "What is the case, Mr. Reed?" He hesitated. "It is not illness. It is merely... The governess has gone, and there are 2 small children. We want someone to give her undivided attention to the children." "I see. Are you a heavy sleeper, Miss Adams?" "A very light one." I fancied he breathed freer. "I hope you are not tired from a previous case." I was beginning to like the voice. "I'm quite fresh," I replied almost gaily. "Even if I were not, I like children, especially well ones. I shan't find looking after them very wearying, I'm sure." Again, the odd little pause. And then he gave me the address on Beauregard Square, and asked me to be sure not to be late. "I must warn you," he added, "we're living in a sort of casual way. Our servants left us without warning. Miss Reed has been getting along as best she could. Most of our meals are being sent in." I was thinking fast. No servants? A good many people think a trained nurse is a sort of upper servant. I've been in houses where they were amazed to discover I was a college woman, finding the 2 things irreconcilable, have openly accused me of being driven to such a desperate course as a hospital training by an unfortunate love affair. Of course you understand that I will look after the children to the best of my ability, but that I will not replace the servants. I fancied he smiled grimly. "That of course. Will you ring twice when you come?" "Ring twice?" "The doorbell," he replied impatiently. I said I would ring the doorbell twice. The young woman below was caroling gaily, ignorant of the 6-barreled menace over her head. I knelt again by my suitcase, but packed little and thought a great deal. I was to arrive before dusk at a house where there were no servants and to ring the doorbell twice. I was to be a light sleeper, although I was to look after 2 healthy children. It was not much in itself, but, connection with the previous nurse's appeal to the police, it took on new possibilities. At 6, I started out to dinner. It was early spring and cold, but quite light. At the first corner I saw Mr. Patton, waiting for a streetcar, and at his quick nod I saw I was to get in also. He did not pay my fare nor speak to me. It was part of a game that we were never seen together except at the remote restaurant I mentioned before. The car thinned out, and I could watch him easily. Far downtown he alighted, and so did I. The restaurant was near. I went in alone and sat down at a table in a recess, and very soon he joined me. We were in the main dining room.
We were in the main dining room, but not of it, a sop at once to the conversations and to the necessity, where he was so well known for caution. I got a little information on the affair we were talking of, he said as he sat down. I'm not so sure I want you to take the case after all. Certainly I shall take it, I retorted with some sharpness. I promise to go. Tut! I am not going to send you into danger unnecessarily. I am not afraid. Exactly. A lot of generals were lost in the Civil War because they were not afraid and wanted to lead their troops instead of saving themselves and their expensive West Point training by sitting back in a safe spot and directing the fight. Any fool can run into danger. It takes intelligence to keep out. I felt my color rising indignantly. Then you brought me here to tell me I am not to go? Will you let me read you 2 reports? You could have told me that at the corner. Will you let me read you 2 reports? If you don't mind, I'll first order something to eat. I'm to be there before dark. Will you let me? I'm going. And you know I'm going. If you don't want me to represent you, I'll go on my own. They want a nurse, and they're in trouble. I think he was really angry. I know I was. If there is anything that takes the very soul out of a woman, it is to be kept from doing a thing she has set her heart on, because some man thinks it's dangerous. If she has any spirit, that rouses it. Mr. Patton quietly replaced the reports in his wallet, and his wallet inside the pocket of his coat, and fell to a judicial survey of the menu. And although he barely glanced at me, he must have seen the determination on my face, for he ordered things that were quickly prepared and told the waiter to hurry. I have wondered lately, he said slowly, whether the mildness of your manner at the hospital was acting, or the chastening effect of 3 years under an order book. A man always likes a woman to be a sheep. Not at all. But it is rather disconcerting to have a pet lamb turn around and take a bite out of one. Will you read the reports now? I think, he said quietly, that they better wait till we have eaten. We will probably both feel calmer. Suppose we arrange that nothing's said before the oysters counts? I agreed, rather sulkily, and the meal went on well enough. I was rather anxious to hurry, but he ate deliberately, drank his demitasse, paid the waiter, and at last met my impatient eyes and smiled. After all, he said, since you are determined to go anyhow, what's the use of reading the reports? Inside of an hour you'll know all you need to know. But he saw that I did not take his teasing well, and drew out the pocketbook. There were 2 typewritten papers clamped together. They're on my desk before me now. The first one is endorsed. Statement by Laura J. Bosworth, nurse of St. Luke's Home for Graduate Nurses. Miss Bosworth says, I do not know just why I came here, but I know I'm frightened. That's the fact. I think there is something terribly wrong in the house that Francis M. Reed, 71 Beauregard Square. I think a crime of some sort has been committed. There are 4 people in this family, Mr. and Mrs. Reed, and 2 children. I was to look after the children. I was there for 4 days, and the children were never allowed out of their room. At night, we were locked in. I kept wondering what I would do if there was a fire. The telephone wires are cut, so no one can call the house. And I believe the doorbell is disconnected, too. But that's fixed now. Mrs. Reed went round all the time with a face like chalk and her eyes staring. At all hours of the night, she'd unlock the bedroom door and come in and look at the children. Almost all the doors to the house were locked. If I wanted to get to the children to boil eggs for the children's breakfast, for there were no servants, and Mrs. Reed is young and doesn't know anything about cooking, Mr. Reed had to unlock about 4 doors for me. If Mrs. Reed looked bad, he was dreadful. Sunken eyes and white and wouldn't eat. I think he has killed someone and is making away with the body. Last night I said I had to have some air, and they let me go out. I called up a friend from a pay station, another nurse. This morning she sent me a special delivery letter that I was needed on another case, and I got away. That's all. It sounds foolish, but try it and see if it doesn't get on your nerves. Mr. Patton looked up at me as he finished reading. Now you see what I mean, he said. That woman was there for 4 days, and she is as temperamental as a cow, but in those 4 days her nervous system went to smash. Doors locked, I reflected. Servants gone. State of fear. It looks like a siege. But why a trained nurse? Why not a policeman, if there is danger? Why anyone at all, if there is something that the police are not to know? That is what I intend to find out, I replied. He shrugged his shoulders and read the other paper. Report of Detective Bennett on Francis M. Reed, April 5th. Francis M. Reed is 36 years of age, married, a chemist at the Olympic Paint Works. He has 2 children, both boys. He has a small independent income and owns the house on Beauregard Square, which was built by his grandfather, General F.R. Reed. Is supposed to be living beyond his means. House is usually full of servants, and grocer in the neighborhood has had to wait for money several times. On March 29th, he dismissed all servants without warning. No reason given, but a week's wages instead of a notice. On March 30th, he applied to the owners of the paint factory for 2 weeks' vacation, gave as his reason nervousness and insomnia. He said he was going to lay off and get some sleep. Has not been back to the work since. House under surveillance this afternoon. No visitors. Mr. Reed telephoned for a nurse at 4 o'clock from a store on 11th Street. Explained that his telephone was out of order. Mr. Patton folded up the papers and thrust them back into his pocket. Evidently, he saw I was determined, for he only said, "Have you got your revolver?" "Yes." "Do you know anything about telephones? Could you repair that one in an emergency?" "In an emergency," I retorted. "There is no time to repair a telephone. But I've got a voice and there are windows. If I really put my mind to it, you will hear me yell at headquarters." He smiled grimly.